Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and I'm here to bring you my winter wrap-up. So towards the end of last year, I decided that I was going to be focusing a little bit less on reading and a lot more on writing in the year of 2019. And I realized I wasn't going to be reading enough books each month to justify doing a monthly reading wrap-up every month. Additionally, since I've downsized my number of videos per month to about one a week, I didn't think it worth it to justify one video out of the 4 you get every month to being exclusively a wrap-up. So I thought, what better way to do it than to combine my wrap-ups into sort of seasonal things. So today is the first one of my seasonal wrap-ups. I know that there's like official demarcations for the seasons, but for the purposes of these videos, winter for me is going to be December 2018 and January and February of 2019. The next one you get is going to cover March, April, and May, and those three will be spring. June, July, and August will be summer, and September, October, and November will be autumn. Great, now that that housekeeping is out of the way, let me tell you what I've been reading these past 3 months. In December, I read a total of 5 books, the first of which was Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens by J.M. Barrie. As you all know, I'm a big fan of Peter Pan's, so when I got the chance to read the origin story to the character that I so dearly love, I jumped right on it. Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens follows little baby Peter, who was lost by his nurse in a tram inside of Kensington Gardens, as he is adopted by birds and fairies and kind of becomes the whimsical character that we know as Peter Pan today. As far as things I liked, Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens kept a lot of the same whimsy that the original story has. Peter, while he wasn't the, preteen to teenage boy that I've always pictured him as, was equally as charming as a small baby, and I liked watching the shenanigans he got up to. As far as things I didn't like, there are certain things in the Peter Pan mythos, like his obsession with good form and his rivalry with Hook, and most importantly for me, his friendship with Wendy, that I was really missing in Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. So while the plot and character and everything were wonderfully done, it didn't have that same spark that I need for a Peter Pan story to be a real Peter Pan story and to have it catch my heart. So I ended up giving Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens a 4 out of 5 stars, which is not that bad, but it's startlingly low for me with regard to a Peter Pan story. After that, I read Ash by Malinda Lo. Ash is a queer retelling of the Cinderella story with some fae mixed in. It follows our titular character, Ash, who is left with her cruel stepmother and stepsisters after her father dies. And her stepmother is very derisive of the sort of religion that Ash grew up with her mom. So Ash's belief in the sort of old religion and the fairies that inhabit her world is looked down upon and considered lesser than, and Ash is forced, as the Cinderella story goes, to basically be an indentured servant for her stepmom and stepsisters. Unhappy with her life, Ash hopes to God that the king of the fairies, who has come to her before, will whisk her away into fairyland. And she runs into the woods to try to escape her current situation, and in the woods she meets the king's royal huntress named Kaisa. And the story kind of goes from there. So as far as things I like, the Cinderella elements in the story were very strong and were only made more interesting by the inclusion of the fae lore that Malinda Lo put into the story. I also think that this depiction of a lesbian relationship was really well done and very sweet and not toxic at all, which I know that's a very low bar, but it is the bar that I have to live with, so I'm very happy to have seen it. As far as things I didn't like, as you can see, Ash is a very short story. I think that it could have done with another 100 pages to sort of better explore the fae element brought into the plot. As it is now, I think the ending felt a little rushed, and because of it, we didn't get as much character development as I normally like to see in stories like this. Because of all that, I ended up giving Ash 3 out of 5 stars. Following that, I read The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is book 1 of N.K. Jemison's The Broken Earth trilogy. It follows 3 women, Essen, Damaya, and Cyanite, in the years leading up to what's essentially the end of the world. In the world of the 5th season, people are plagued by these great seismic events. The earth shakes, and then a 5th season happens, which lasts sometimes several hundred, sometimes several thousand years, where it's basically impossible to live and people have to hunker down and basically apocalypse bunkers and survive until it's over to restart humanity. In addition to human beings, there are also a race of beings called Origines, which are like people, but they have basically earth-bending abilities, and they can control or cause these seismic activities that could potentially lead to a 5th season. Because of their power, Origines are feared and sort of cast out of society and forced into basically indentured servitude by the great governments of these bigger city-states. I can't really give any more information about the story without completely spoiling it, and it's definitely one that I think you should read, so I'm going to stop it right there and urge you to pick it up. As far as things I liked about the 5th season, I was a little confused at first because I thought it was a fantasy story, but there was very sci-fi heavy elements, and I kind of realized that it's basically a 50-50 split between fantasy and sci-fi, and that was just an incredible world to read. Additionally, I thought all of the characters were very, very compelling. I understood their motivations, I understood why they did what they did, and I understood how they found themselves to be in the situations they found themselves to be in. Nothing felt like it was forced in. The plot felt as though it was derived from the characters, which I personally love in any sort of fantasy or sci-fi book. I can't think of an element that I didn't like. Perhaps the beginning felt a little slow because you're just getting into the story, but I personally don't mind that. I'm a big fan of more dense sci-fi fantasy, so I mean, I gave the 5th season 5 stars, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. The 4th book that I read in the month of December was The Secret Lives of Geek Girls, which is an anthology edited by Hope Nicholson. The Secret Lives of Geek Girls is a collection of comics and short stories and images created by geek girls. So as far as things I liked the diversity of stories, I liked the diversity of art styles. I was a big fan of seeing a bunch of women come together to talk about the things and the people that they love and how geek culture and nerd culture sort of helped them shape and find out the things that they love. As far as things I didn't like, I mean, I'm not sure that it's a dislike, but I was definitely blindsided a little bit going into this story. I thought it was going to be more about discovering the love of nerd culture, but really it's about finding romantic or sexual love or navigating those worlds through the lens of geek culture. So definitely be prepared for that going in, otherwise you're going to have a bit of a strange time with these stories. I ended up giving The Secret Loves 3 out of 5 stars, with the caveat that if I had read it slower and read one story at a time, as tends to be the case for me when I'm reading short story collections, I think that I would have enjoyed it a lot more. I would still definitely recommend it, but keep those things in mind when you're going in. And the last thing that I read in the month of December was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. The Bear and the Nightingale follows Vasya, the youngest daughter of a lord residing in a land that will be known as Russia in the future, but Russia as an entity doesn't exist yet in this point in history. And Vasya has always been a little different. She follows the old religion as her mother did, but she doesn't just believe in old pagan spirits, she can actually see them and communicate with them. After Vasya's mother dies, her father marries a very devout Christian woman who is determined to kick out every trace of paganism. So Vasya has to find a way to keep the household protective spirits alive because they're the only things protecting her household and her father's fiefdom, kingdom. He's not quite a king. His dominion, the people under in his domain, safe from the Lord of the Winter. I don't want to give any more information than that because this is another book that I think you should go into completely blind because, oh my goodness. So as far as things I like, I mean everything, similarly to the 5th season, but the thing that really stands out most to me is the feeling of it, the mood of the story. I read this book while in Hawaii. I was wearing t-shirts and shorts every single day, and every time I opened the book, I still shivered. This book encapsulates the feeling of winter. Sometimes it gives you that cozy winter where you're huddled under a blanket on your couch with a hot cup of cocoa or something, and other times it is the harsh, dangerous, bone-chilling winter, but the feel of it is always there, which I really, really appreciated. As far as things I didn't like, it sort of just falls under things that I think I would have rather seen a little more of. I loved Vasya's relationship with her family. I wish that maybe we had seen her interact more with some of the female members of her family in a not negative way. Additionally, I would have liked to get more of the historical background, the context of the rest of the world, though I do know that this story as a foundational thing was focused more on character relationships than it was what's going on outside in the rest of the world. So my fingers are crossed that we get more of that in book 2 and 3. And needless to say, I really liked The Bear and the Nightingale, and I ended up giving it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. This brings us into January. The first book that I read there was a buddy read with my friends Averie and Hannah, whose channels I'll have linked in the description box below, and it was Bright We Burn by Kirsten White. Bright We Burn is book 3 of the Conquerors saga, following Lada Dracul, who is a gender-bent version of Vlad Dracul, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler. I'm not really sure how to describe this book without spoiling books 1 and 2 pretty heavily, so I'm not going to. I will link my And I Darken reading vlog / review in the description box below if you want to learn a little bit more about that. As far as things I like, I think that Bright We Burn pushed all of our characters to their utmost limits. To keep from spoiling things, everybody got exactly what they wanted. Whether the things they wanted were exactly what they needed, that's a different story, but I won't say anything else about that. As far as things I didn't like, I think that the ending was maybe a little too perfect. Maybe it was just because I came off the high of reading Now I Rise, which is by far my favorite of the series, but I sort of wanted things to be pushed a little farther. That said, I still really enjoyed Bright We Burn. I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was an excellent conclusion to the trilogy. And after that, I read my most anticipated read of 2019. I read Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. Blood Witch is the 3rd book in Susan Dennard's Witchlands series, and like Bright We Burn, I can't really explain what goes on in here without spoiling books 1, 2, and 2.5. So let it suffice to say that it follows Aedwin, the Blood Witch, who has been a very, very important character up till now, on his journey in discovering what matters more to him, a future he can believe in, or loyalty to a regime that he maybe doesn't quite feel certain of anymore. As far as things I liked, as always with these books, everything. I loved everyone's character development. Everything flowed beautifully from the previous book, and with the additional information that we got about the Witchlands world and the plot of this series in Sight Witch, so many things are beginning to make sense, and these little inklings of plot are beginning to unravel themselves, and I'm just constantly amazed with the brilliance that is Susan Dennard's mind for plotting and character and setting, for writing in general. Everything comes together in such a smart way, but it's not always, deep and scary. There's moments where it's funny, there's moments where it's heartbreaking. It's just an emotional roller coaster. I don't know what else to say about this series that I haven't already. And as far as things I didn't like, goose egg. Literally nothing. Nothing. No, nada. After Blood Witch, I read The Martian by Andy Weir. The Martian follows Mark Watney, a member of a mission to Mars to see if they can make it habitable. And Mark's entire crew basically leaves him stranded because they think he died after a dust storm that made their mission impossible to continue. Against the odds, he survived and has to learn how to stay alive in a very hostile landscape until he can communicate with Earth again and hopefully convince them to send a probe to save his life. As far as things I liked about The Martian, it was so fast-paced. I haven't watched the movie yet, but I imagine it's going to translate super well to film because it's just so edge of your seat the entire time. It's told in what are essentially like video log formats where Mark is recounting what happened in the day or days before, but even so, the suspense is unimaginable. As far as things I didn't like, sometimes I thought that things happened too easily, and I know that that's not fair to say because it's literally about a guy surviving on an inhospitable planet. I never got the sense that he was in any real danger while reading. And I think that's kind of the point for a book that's meant to be a bit of a thriller, but it was still an enjoyable read, so I ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. After that, I read Victorian Porn. The book is called The Memoirs of Fanny Hill. It was written by John Cleland, and it's the story of the eponymous Fanny Hill, a young virginal farm girl turned prostitute in London. I don't know why I read this. I think it was really interesting, I guess, to know that the Victorians weren't all, prim and proper all the time. Like, this was a book that was written and read and widely circulated, which is fascinating to me. But it just, for erotica, it wasn't that erotic. There was some homophobia there, and I don't know, I just felt really squicked out reading about a grown man writing from the point of view of a 14 to 16, 17-year-old girl. I don't think that 30-year-old men do that very well, especially when they're writing about that girl having sex with adult men. Squeaked me out. I ended up giving it half a star just because of how fascinating it is. I don't think I've even rated it on Goodreads just because I'm still so confused about what I've read. But I don't know, if you're at all interested, pick it up. It's free on Project Guggenheim. After that, I read a manuscript for my book editing class, which I don't think I'm at liberty to talk about. Let it suffice to say that a lot of time was spent on this one. And the final book that I read in the month of January was Queens of Fenburn by Kendara Blake. Queens of Fenburn is a bind-up of The Young Queens and The Oracle Queen, 2 novellas set in Fenburn, which is the Three Dark Crowns universe. The Young Queens follows the stories of Mirabella, Arsinoe, and Catherine, our favorite 3 queens from the main series, when they were children and still got along, and sort of acts as the origin story for all of them before book 1. And the Oracle Queen follows the last of the Oracle Queens, what's her name? Queen Elsabet, who was rumored to have gone mad and killed half of her court, but of course that is the history as told by the winners. The Oracle Queen sort of shows her perspective and the truth of that incident. I'm a huge fan of the Three Dark Crowns universe. I think it's finally time for me to continue it, considering the last book is coming out. As far as things I liked about this, for both of the stories, I just love Kendara Blake's writing style. I think it's beautiful and rich and dark, and these were a perfect bridge to sort of tide me over and help me decide to make the plunge to continue the rest of the series. I'm not sure that I disliked anything. Perhaps I would have liked the stories to be longer, but that said, they are novellas. They're meant to be additional information rather than like a full story in and of themselves. I don't tend to like novellas very much, so I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars rather than a full 5 out of 5, but I am excited to continue with the rest of the series. And in the month of February, I ended up reading 8 books, the first of which is The English Roses by Madonna. Yes, that Madonna, the singer. I actually ended up reading this picture book by consuming a YouTube video where a friend of mine, Averie, who I mentioned before and whose channel is linked in the description box, she read it out loud, which was a delightful way to experience the story. The English Roses follows a set of 4 girls who are very close friends, and they all kind of get jealous of this one other girl who is pretty and really smart and seems to have all the blessings of the world bestowed upon her, and they're not very nice to her for that reason, until one day they sort of get a glimpse into that other girl's life and they realize that maybe she could use a friend. It's a really sweet story about women supporting other women, and is there anything that Madonna can't do? As far as things I like, because it is a picture book, I would be remiss to not mention the art style. I think it's absolutely beautiful, very interesting and different from anything that I've ever seen before. I recommend you go check it out. And as far as things I didn't like, I don't think there's anything I didn't like. I think it's really sweet and a great way to teach young girls to be nice to one another, because we're like force-fed mean girl tropes since we're about yay high. So I think that we should also be force-fed that's not the only way that women can be friends tropes, you know? Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Good time. Would read again. After that, I read another manuscript for my book editing class. Again, I can't really say anything about it because it's not published and I wouldn't want to endanger the author or put myself at risk for legal action, so I'm not going to talk about it. And then I finally did it. I finally finished The Six of Crows duology by reading Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Oh my god. Okay, I'm not going to say anything about this series because everyone on BookTube's heard of it. Well, I am a little bit, but I'm not going to talk about this book in particular because spoilers for book 1. Book 1 is basically Ocean's 11, but there's 6 people and you fall in love with all of them, and it's really good. It's a heist book, but with a little bit of magic, and I love everything about that. I guess that covers it for things I liked. I didn't dislike anything. I disliked the fact that I cried for the last 40 pages, just, tears streaming down my cheeks, and the reading went very slowly because I kept having to wipe away my tears as they blurred my vision. It's a phenomenal book, a phenomenal conclusion. And if you've read Six of Crows but you haven't read Crooked Kingdom yet, you're doing it wrong. You have to read this book. It's amazing. God bless Leigh Bardugo. I will read anything that she writes, and I'm super excited to dive into King of Scars. It goes without saying I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read Waiting by Ha Jin. Waiting is an interesting story in that the plot is like nothing I've ever read before because not much happens. It's more like a character sketch and a sketch of a time period. Waiting follows Lin, a doctor under Chairman Mao's regime when the People's Party held power in China. Lin is from a village where he married a woman kind of against his will, but sort of to appease his parents. But he works in the city, and while he's there, he meets a nurse practitioner, and he kind of falls in love with her. The problem is he can't marry her unless he divorces his wife, and his wife refuses to divorce him. There is a little caveat. He can divorce his wife without her consent after 18 years of sort of living separately and having wanted the divorce. And the book chronicles those 18 long years. As far as things I liked about Waiting, such a different lived experience from my own. I'm so intrigued by how it was written and by the image of a contemporary China that's like one of the past. Ha Jin actually lived in China during this regime, so he kind of knows what he's talking about. And it was just so fascinating to read about a culture that's just so wildly different from anything I've ever known. And Lin frustrated me slightly as a protagonist because he wasn't all, action man, but I guess that's just, my Western principles and ideas about what a man and what a protagonist should look like coming into play. But I still really liked him despite him not really fitting into the stereotype that I kind of wanted to push him into. As far as things I didn't like, it really was a lot of waiting. Additionally, it felt like, and trigger warning, I guess, for rape. There was a rape scene that sort of felt shoved in there and not quite necessary, just put there to create more drama for one of the 2 women who, throughout the story, Lynn is screwing over. Didn't like that, was not a fan. I don't think it needed to happen, but I really just didn't like how it was reacted to more than that. And again, that's my Western sensibilities, but the blame was very much put on the victim rather than the perpetrator. Not a fan, but I still really liked the book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. After I finished waiting, I read Sorry Not Sorry by Jamie Reed. Sorry Not Sorry follows Janelle and Alyssa, two former best friends who have sort of grown apart into frenemies. Janelle comes from a family that's very community-oriented and service-oriented. Her parents and older sister are part of a relief team that travels to developing nations to bring them food and shelter and medicine, etc. And Jamie does what she can to focus on bettering her community. The city that they grew up in was recently hit by a hurricane, and she is working on providing relief to the victims of this tragedy. And her former best friend Alyssa, who used to sort of run all these schemes and doings with her, has kind of gone the opposite way. She is more focused on growing herself as a brand and her popularity, though she still works with Janelle insofar as she's very good at gathering support for missions like this. At first, the reasons behind Janelle and Alyssa's breaking friendship aren't fully clear, though as the story goes on you find out more about that. And it's all triggered by the fact that in the middle of a rally to raise money and awareness for the victims of the hurricane, Alyssa ends up passing out, going into organ failure, and needing a transplant of a kidney, and Janelle discovers that she is a perfect match for her. So Sorry Not Sorry is a very fun story. It's YA, but sort of, I think, geared towards maybe like 12 to 15, more so than upper YA, which is like the 16 through 19-ish age range. As far as things I like, I really enjoyed reading about Janelle and Alyssa's friendship and watching their dynamic develop and change from their youth where they were inseparable to their pseudo-adulthood, since they're about 18 by the close of the novel, where they still have like this teasing sort of friendship, but they're a lot better and more mature about how they handle one another. It was really fascinating to read about the stigmas that came up around Janelle wanting to donate her kidney for Alyssa, because apparently people of color are less likely to donate organs, and the book goes into more detail about why that happens to be the case. But it was really interesting to see Janelle sort of come to terms with and struggle with the fact that she is donating an organ to a white girl who she isn't even very close friends with versus a different brown person who's maybe been on the list for even longer. As far as things I didn't like, as I said, this is sort of geared toward a younger subset of YA, so sometimes the plot felt a little bit simple. Additionally, I didn't really understand Alyssa's antagonism. She was kind of a mean girl throughout the whole story, and it's never really explained as to why. And that's not saying that women aren't allowed to be kind of mean and snappy, but I really don't understand why Janelle would want to rekindle their friendship or why she was friends with her in the first place. She was hard to like, so it was hard to root for her, despite the fact that she had, you know, a failing organ and was dying. And I feel like I need to have at least sympathy for the characters. Even if I don't like them, I need to be able to empathize with them. And the way that she was cruel just made it close to impossible. I still enjoyed this story. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Sorry Not Sorry came out on February the 26th, so if you're interested, I recommend picking up a copy. After that, I read The Last Reports of the Miracles at Little No Horse by Louise Erdrich. This story follows Father Damien, a priest on the land of the tribe of the Anishinaabe, as he tries to convince the Vatican to not canonize as a saint a woman, what's her name, named Sister Leopolda. Sister Leopolda performed what some might consider miracles, but she didn't live a saintly life, and Father Damien really just does not want a despicable woman to be entered into the books that way. The story is mostly told in a flashback that says how Father Damien got to the reservation in the first place, and sort of details his life and dealings with the Anishinaabe people. There's a very surface level sort of synopsis, but I really can't get into it any deeper without spoiling it, so I'm not going to say any more. As far as things I liked about the story, I really enjoyed the relationships between the characters. Father Damien was very interesting to read about, and I in particular loved his relationship with an Anishinaabe man called Nanapush. The two became very close friends throughout the duration of the novel, and it was just really heartwarming to watch them grow from this sort of like at oddsness to very, very close, almost like a brotherly friendship. As far as things I didn't like, I just didn't click with Louise Erdrich's writing style. The story and the concept were very interesting, and I think it's an important story to tell. I just don't think it was told in a way that I personally found the most compelling, and for this reason I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well. All right, the last book that I read for the month of February was Brick Lane by Monica Ali. Brick Lane follows the life of Nazneen, a Bangladeshi immigrant in London. As a woman from a small Bangladeshi village, there are certain expectations placed upon Nazneen because of her gender. She even moved to London because her parents arranged a marriage between her and a man named Chanu, who is significantly older than her and doesn't quite respect her as a person at the open of the novel. And Brick Lane is sort of the story of her discovering what it means to have her own agency and then acting upon that for herself and for her two daughters. So I really enjoyed Brick Lane. I really liked Nazneen's sort of inner monologue. I liked learning about what it's like to be a Bangladeshi person living in London, and I liked the letters we get from her sister Hasina, who still lives in Bangladesh, about what life is like for a woman living in Bangladesh versus what life is like for a woman living in the West. The contrast between those two women's experiences was phenomenal and very interesting to read about. The entire dynamic reminded me of a book that I read last year called Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows that I enjoyed very much. As far as things I didn't like, there were times when I felt the plot was moving a little bit slowly, despite there being a lot of literal time covered, like years and years of time throughout the novel. I sometimes felt that the bits that should have been slowed down and focused on were sort of sped through, and then the bits that should maybe have been sped through a little bit were heavily focused on, and I wasn't quite sure as to why Monica Ali chose to do it that way. Overall, though, I really enjoyed the story. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I consumed in the month of February was actually my first foray into audiobooks that I actually enjoyed, and I listened to The Power by Naomi Alderman. Power takes place in a world much like ours, where one day young women about the age of 15-ish start developing the ability to shoot electricity out of their bodies, and overnight, literally, they become stronger than the men who, because we live in a patriarchy, are in power. And as more and more women develop this power and realize that they are strong, the story sort of follows their evolution, shall we say. The entire thing is framed as an alternate history novel written by a man in a world where women have the electroshock capabilities. And it's pretty clearly an allegory for how the world as a whole treats women and the systems in power that have been around that have kept women subjugated to men. It's very, very interesting. So as far as things I liked, most of it, let's see. I really enjoyed watching the storyline of Mother Eve, who is a young girl that realizes that she can lead a religious sort of revolution to empower young women and protect young women from atrocities like rape and other awful things that happen to girls on a much higher scale than they do to men. I also liked that I didn't like all of the women that were coming into power. The book was very good about dismantling the idea that women are docile and naturally more nurturing and community oriented than men. Like on a natural level, I'm sure that is very much conditioned into us, but the book showed how if the circumstances in which the conditioning happened were changed, that then the result of those circumstances and conditioning could also change. As far as things I didn't like about The Power, from an audiobook perspective, I thought that the narrator who did some of the voices kind of overacted a few of them, like gave them accents that I'm not sure were best suited for her voice. It was pretty difficult to listen to which chapter. The Roxy chapters were a little tough because it was a very like heavy Cockney accent, and I'm not, I don't know, it made it harder to listen to because I do like to listen at about 1.75 to 2 speed, and I sometimes felt that I had to slow down for certain chapters to sort of really understand what the hell she was saying. But from a story perspective, I think that, okay, I changed my mind, because looking back on it, after having let the story sit for a couple days, I totally understand why it all went the way it did. I was going to say that I didn't like how quickly some things sort of devolved, how quickly certain like men's rights activism groups got violent, and I didn't like just how sleazy some of these women who rose to power were. But I understand their purpose and what they were meant to serve if we read The Power as an allegory, and just the idea that men wouldn't get really butthurt after a patriarchy had existed for several thousand years and then all of a sudden women were stronger than them. That's, I think, the most unrealistic thing to expect. So I think it does make sense on a narrative and literal sense. So I'm not sure that I truly dislike them. Overall, though, I enjoyed The Power. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I think that I'll be listening to more audiobooks from now on. So this is it for my winter wrap-up. I'm going to put it down down because my upper body strength is not what it used to be. If you agree with any of the opinions that I kind of gave you for any of these books, please let me know down below. I always love chatting fiction, and if you vehemently disagree, great. Let me know, see if you can change my mind. I would love to have a discussion with any of you about any of these. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave me a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to this channel. There won't be many wrap-ups, but I promise when they come, they'll be pretty great. I apologize for the lateness of this video. From now on, I will be on a Saturday posting schedule. Hold me to that, please. So until next Saturday, that's it for me. Thank you again for watching, and goodbye.